Don't be afraid. We heard that all last month in our Christmas character series during Advent and Christmas. And lo and behold, we opened this series up from a reading from the Old Testament, Genesis. And our first verse from chapter 15, we heard Annika read, "Don't be afraid, Abram." Easier said than done in these times, I'm afraid to say, no pun intended. I'm Reverend John B. Rudolph from the North Carroll Cooperative Parish, and I'm glad that you have joined us here in 2021 in NCCP Anywhere Worship, wherever you may find yourself 24/7, following us as we discover God's Word together. Above all else, as I reflect on not just 2020 with COVID and race relations and politics, the election, and then into 2021 now with the events of this past week, as we saw anger turn into a mob, turn into crashing the Capitol scene as Congress was meeting in a joint session. With all that, and in the context of don't be afraid, what I am afraid of most, what I am most fearful of, is that our children, and not just my personal children, not just the kids in our household, but all children around the world, and especially here in our United States, are witnessing adults not just behaving poorly, but behaving like we don't want our children to behave. Taking their ball and going home, tattletaling on one another, arguing that turns to yelling, that turns to fighting, physical fighting. When they're called on something, they're called for making a mistake, they blame others, or they whine and complain, or even worse yet, they say, yeah, but they did this, or it's the same as what just happened over here. That's childish, and that's how kids act. I used to be, I'm not just a father where I have to deal with those kinds of behaviors at home, but I used to be an assistant principal, and so I would deal with discipline all day long, and I'd have kids come into my office, and they would try all those tactics. And as a good school administrator, I wouldn't tolerate any of that. You would still deal with helping that child, that student grow through their mistakes, take their punishment if it was warranted, and move on and learn as part of the process. What our kids witness on TV and the news, what our kids witness on social media, what our kids witness even in our own homes as we adults try to discuss and argue is really fearful because it's learned behavior. And so we need to have, first of all, the buck stop with us. Quit blaming other people. I am part of the problem. I need to be a good role model. And again, regardless of whether I have kids in my household or not, I need to be a good role model, and not just a good role model, but a good, godly role model, a good Christian role model in our context. We need more role models. We need you to be a good role model for the kids that are watching you. So all month long, we're going to be looking at some Old Testament scriptures from Genesis, the book of Genesis, and we're going to be reading these and studying these right alongside the kids of our parish or of NCCP Anywhere. And so if you have a kid or a grandkid or a neighbor's kid that is not aware of our kids' curriculum that can be accessed online, they just need to go to our Kids X page under our website, and they'll be able to access some really fun material that goes along with these stories. So we're studying these together. Or if you're just curious and you want to see, from a kid's eye perspective, what we say about Abraham on the website, be sure to go check that out. Today we are talking about Abraham, and what a role model for us, because Abraham, just like most of the all-stars of the Bible, other than Jesus, is just an ordinary human being, a flawed human being that is, in this case, called by God, equipped, enters into a covenant, and the rest is history. But a human being that makes mistakes, that has to grow from those mistakes, and somebody that we can learn from and that we can emulate and that we can use as we want to be models as well. Abraham is a story of trust. Trusting in God's plan. God has a plan. In fact, the rest of the Bible and the rest of the Old Testament is going to be living this plan with this covenant people that's going to begin with Abraham. The world is a wreck at this point in the Bible when we get to chapter 12 of Genesis. 12 chapters in and things have fallen apart. God's going to right the course by using a family. The head of this family is Abram at first, and Sarai. He's going to use this family to right the course. And so here we are. So 3 things are needed, and 3 things we can learn from the story of Abram as we learn and want to be able to trust God's plan as well. And here's how Abraham and how it plays out for Abraham. The first thing is simply obedience. And so in order to trust God's plan, you have to be obedient to God's plan. And here we are in chapter 15. That was our reading for today. And it's really right in the middle of the beginning of the Abram story, which starts in chapter 12, where the actual call happens. Chapter 15 is where we have a visit again from the Lord to Abram. And he says, "Don't be afraid, Abram. I'm your protector. Your reward will be very great." And then they have this conversation. Abram pushes back and says, how can I have all these children when I have 0? And so God takes him outside and he says, "Look up at the sky, count the stars if you think you can count them." So they have this great moment outside looking up at the heavens. And as he replays this call and this blessing that he's putting upon Abram and his family, he uses the sky as an image, as a metaphor. So Abram is reminded here that he has to be obedient, and it's going to build towards and lead towards some trust. But he's human, and so he's going to get off to if we go back to chapter 12 when Abram is first called, 4 verses into the Abraham story, we learn that he's already been disobedient. He was supposed to leave his land behind. He's supposed to leave his household behind, and he's supposed to leave all his family behind. And just him and Sarah are supposed to go out on this journey that God's called him to be on. And verse 4, we're told that he takes Lot with him. So he messes up from the beginning. He's disobedient. So even this great all-star of the Bible, who I'm going to ask to be our role model here to kick off this series, is flawed from the very beginning. And the irony is that we have this clear conversation several times, not just once, but twice, 3 times, 4 times. God and Abraham are going to have these conversations. And think about it this way, Ernie, and we have this conversation. I'll get to Ernie in just a second. We have this conversation with God and Abram outside. They're looking up at the heavens. And it's very clear. It's very clear to us that the Lord is talking to God, or to Abram. It's very clear that Abram's looking up at this very beautiful sky that's completely clear, and he can see millions of stars because there's no light pollution. There's no satellites. And Ernie got a telescope for Christmas. And we even have this app that the phone can sit right on the telescope, and it's called a stargazer, and you can look up, and you're supposed to be able to tell the constellations and the different stars and that sort of thing. It'll even tell you if it's a satellite. But that's the problem, is that we live in a world that there's so many lights, even in our neighborhood in Hampstead, and there's satellites in the sky. It's just not really a clear picture. So it's even worse for us today compared to Abram looking up in this bright, beautiful sky, in terms of the dangers that we have about clarity when it comes to obedience. But the point is, we have to cipher through all the noise and all the things that are around us and be obedient to the plan. If we want to trust God's plan, the first step is to be obedient. The second thing is that to be patient. Now, first of all, let's just get this clear. When Abram gets the call in chapter 12, he's 75 years old. So God, throughout the scriptures, he's going to call all sorts of men and women of all sorts of ages. But this first one, Abram, is 75. And then by the time that we get to this discussion about the covenant and the circumcision, we learn in chapter 17 that he's 99. So all these years, even after the call at 75, that's already pretty, he's already in his retirement age. Now it's not until he's 99. And so all these years have gone by, and he hasn't had a single, moment yet that would say that him and this reality of the blessing is going to come true. Isaac has not been born. All along the way, though, he's going to have opportunities to mess up again and then grow from that. He's going to get involved in ways that he's going to try to solve the problem, but always constantly remembering and getting put back on track as a reminder to you and I, just be patient. If God has put a plan in place, it will work out. We'll be obedient to that plan, but we also have to be patient. And then here's what I really love about this, and my favorite part of this week's message, and the most important part probably for you and I. It's pretty common sense. If we're going to trust in God's plan, that we got to be obedient to it, and we have to be patient. We probably heard that before. But maybe this is new for us. And that is, in order to trust God's plan, we have to watch out for well-meaning people. Whoa. Watch out for well-meaning, godly people in your lives who are going to try to help you along the way in terms of living out God's plan. And you say, oh, well, how can that be a problem? We got well-meaning people. We need their support and help. Well, yeah, we need encouragement. We need support. We might need some assistance along the way, but we got to watch out for well-meaning people and not just automatically take their advice or automatically take their hand or automatically follow them to wherever they're going. Because remember, we're following God's plan, not our well-meaning friend's plan. And here's how it plays out. It plays out at least two easy times that we can see here in Abram's story early on. Number one, again, 4 verses in, he takes Lot with him, breaks the covenant right off the bat. And we can imagine, it doesn't say this, but we can imagine Lot, Lot was his nephew. So we can imagine, Lot's parents going to Abram and saying, hey, look, you're old. This is going to be a long journey. Lot's not doing anything. He doesn't have a job. Take him along with you. He'll help you out. Well-meaning brother or sister here in Abram's case, passing Lot along. And so not an evil thing, not a bad thing, but it gets him off track. And it leads to disobedience right off the bat. Well-meaning people offering help in the form of Lot, and all kinds of things happen because of that, and he has to get back on track. Another issue here, and I don't want to get into sexism and all that kind of stuff, but it's true, it's black and white here in the text. Sarai, Abram's wife, and she goes through a lot. Abram makes some mistakes with her as well, passing her off as a sister, and so he's not clean here in this case either. But she's well-meaning. She's old. She's not of childbearing age. She's not menstruating. How can this plan come to be when I'm beyond that age? And she says, but here, Abram, you can take Hagar, my servant. Well-meaning, completely legal, biblical even in this case, to give her servant to her husband in order that they can have heirs. The only problem is it wasn't part of God's plan. A well-meaning person here got him off track, and it caused lots of issues going forward. But Abram overcomes all that. He gets back on track. He gets to be more obedient, more patient, and he starts to not listen to well-meaning people, but listen to God only. And obviously, the birth of Isaac that happens a couple chapters later. And then the rest is history. We're going to get into Isaac and his heirs as well here in a couple weeks. But a great lesson. Abram becomes Abraham. Sarah becomes Sarah. Abraham and Sarah become great role models of faith for us, for you and I, wherever we may be in our journeys of faith or life, or if we just simply need some encouragement today in terms of trusting in God's plan, even as everything around us may look like it's falling apart. How do we stay true to God's plan that God has for our life, or the life of our family, or the life of our career, or the life of our church, or whatever the case may be? How do we stay true and trustworthy to what God has placed in front of us? And Abraham gives us a great place to start with a role model. I love this to kind of sum up Abraham as we prepare to move forward to further down the road with Isaac and then Jacob and Esau. And that is David Cotter, who's a scholar. He said, in Abram, we see what it means to have faith. It means to trust in a relationship, even when trust seems unwarranted. But why did he believe? Because he chose to trust. So this linkage of trust and belief in God's plan is what I want to leave us with this day in terms of this particular message about needing role models like Abraham, is that you and I need to trust in God's plan. That will lead us to believing actually in God's plan, which helps us to overcome the fear. So we move from being fearful to being fully trustful, and that helps us to maintain our belief in God. And so as we navigate this week, you maybe turn off the news for a time. Maybe stay off social media for a moment and enter into times of prayer and scripture reading here, thanking God for role models like Abraham or others that you might have in your life, and asking God to help you to build those levels of trust in Him and in God's plan, in order that we can be good role models for the little eyes that are watching us. Remember, everything we do and say, somebody is watching, especially in today's age. And if it's little eyes that are watching, it is extremely impactful to them, not just for the way they're going to behave now, but the way they're going to behave as adults too. And so be sure to go to that website, especially if you're just curious or if you have kids or grandkids in the household. Go to our website, NCCP UMC, look for the Kids X material, and you'll be able to find some media and some information about Abram from a kid's point of view, which a lot of times is instructive for us as well. And put your fear on the back burner this week by trusting that in God's plan for your life and the life of those around us as well. May God be with you. Amen.